Do you want to just start talking and then I'll ask everybody a question?
Sure. It's working. All right. When I was 25, I moved to Boston for the first time, and I had a teaching job, and one of the and I was 25. At that point in my life, like my parents got married when they were younger, like they were like 20. And so I always thought I was like gonna get married young. I just thought that was the thing. I was gonna like start a family, even though I didn't really want any of those things. I just assumed that like that was how my life was gonna go since I was young. And so I was working at another school in Boston, and there was one of these times where like I met someone that I worked with. Like I had a coworker who we just like connected very quickly, like very like right away we were like oh, like this is someone who I might be interested in. Like we had sort of similar intellectual way of living. We had a lot of things in common, but there's also some like sometimes with that there's also like an adversarial relationship where you sort of like you kind of like someone but you sort of are like bitter rivals at the same time, because you're like so it was this funny year, and like as is often the case when you meet someone interesting, like you're usually both dating somebody else they don't really like as much, and so that was kind of the case. And so it's like we worked together for a year, and it was like we both sort of knew at some point that we would probably end up dating or maybe something like that, but like there were definitely times where she like hated me. Like even during when we were just getting to know each other and working together, it's like it's this really weird thing, and sometimes life is like that. It's like the like love hate thing is a lot closer than like hate and indifference or love and indifference. So it's like sometimes if you're really into someone, like just all of the emotions are really strong, not just the good ones. And so it was sort of like that, but it was like because we were both dating other people, there was no chance we were gonna like end up, or there was no pressure because it was just like couldn't happen. Like we had different things going on in our lives, and then our year of working together was about to end, and we were both single at that time, and like a week before, I was gonna leave for Oregon. Like I didn't have a job or anything. I was just like moving back out west. There was like a like an all school event that we both ended up at, and we started talking more and more. And it was like suddenly it was like, wait a minute, I think we actually have really liked each other for a whole year now, but we're both like too stubborn to do anything about it or to recognize it. And so she was starting school in Vermont. She was going to grad school in like the beginning of July, and this was the very beginning of June, and so I thought I was leaving forever. So we ended up spending like some time together over the next couple of days, and then suddenly I was just like, hey, why don't you drive out west with me? And so at that time I had like an old Jeep Wrangler, and I was like putting all my belongings in the car, and she was like, okay. So suddenly we gone from like me leaving the East forever and her going to grad school in Vermont to her like moving out west with me for a while. So we went and drove out to Oregon, and it was like very strange because suddenly it's like you're just sitting there all day every day in the car next to someone that you like sort of know, but you're like, this is kind of weird. I don't know. It was like sort of a fun trip, but it was so weird to me. I was like, oh my God, what have I done? Like if I just committed to something very random and I didn't think it through, I was just like, whatever, let's like, why don't you move to Oregon? So the drive was okay, and then we got to Oregon, and then she had to fly back to Vermont to go to grad school. And so she did, and I was like, all right, and she was moving to Paris in the fall anyway, so I was like, okay, that's over. And then about 2 weeks into my stay in Oregon, I was like, oh my God, like that might be the person I'm gonna marry. Like I just had like this total like second thoughts, like, oh my God, I messed that up. And so I think she had been kind of upset about the way that I ended it by just being like, okay, see you later, after like inviting her all the way out to Oregon and everything. So she was in Vermont for a while, and we didn't really talk, and then sometimes we talked, but then sometimes I didn't want to talk and wouldn't call her for a while, so I was just being like, I was all over the place. And finally I decided, oh no, this is the person that I really like. This should be my girlfriend, or maybe like something. And so I called her in Vermont to tell her that from Oregon, and she was already dating somebody else. She'd met another guy, probably a better one. And so I was like, oh no, what am I going to do? Like, I've totally really screwed this up. I happened to have to go to Boston. I had to fly back from Oregon to go to Boston for this, like for a wedding. And so I was there in the wedding. And then at the like Sunday, before, like the Sunday I was flying back to Oregon, she was going to be in Boston, and it was uncertain if we were even going to see each other, and because it had just been like so rocky and so weird the whole time. And so we had like a conversation outside her apartment in downtown Boston, and it basically went badly. And she was like, "All right, this is stupid. Go away." And so she went back in her apartment, and I was about to walk away down the street, and just like those scenes you see in like the movies, I was like, oh no, like that can't happen. And so I knew she was getting in her car to like drive away, like to drive back to Vermont to finish grad school or whatever. And so I stood outside like the garage, like the automatic garage door where her car was parked under the building, and she pulled up and saw me standing there, and she like rolled her window down, and I just started like professing my love and like crying, and just like it was this big moment. And she was like, "All right, get in the car." So she drove around for a while. We drove around for a while, and I was like, "All right, let's really give this a try. Like, this is going to be a great time, a great relationship." And she was like, "Okay," and then basically dropped me at the airport. I flew back to Oregon. Then I came back. I drove back pretty much as soon as I got out there. And we saw each other a little bit in Boston. Then she moved to Paris like a couple days later for a year. And so I was living at like a really weird person's house. Like, this is when I was young. I didn't have enough money for an apartment really. I was still teaching, but I was staying on the third floor of some people's house, like not paying rent in exchange for tutoring their kids. But it turned out like the place I was staying had like I knew the mom and the two kids very well because I like taught them the year before. But it turned out that the place I was living had like the dad, parents weren't divorced, they just didn't get along, and the dad was also living like a hermit on the third floor next to me, and like never came out of his room except to go to work. And so I like was staying in this really weird house. I had this maybe girlfriend in Paris, and then I was my first year teaching at Meadowbrook too. So I'm like teaching all day at Meadowbrook, then I'm going home. I'm like having dinner with the kids and the mom, and then I'm going upstairs, and like there's this random old grouchy guy like living across the hall from me, who like now like trying to make it normal would like come down to dinner sometimes. It was really weird. And so then I'd do that, and then I'd go to bed early, and then I'd have to wake up at like 6 a.m. to call this girl in Paris because like the time difference was so bad. So I would call and talk on my way to work while she was going, and then like one time she surprised me by showing up in Boston, like at the end of October. She just flew back, and that was actually fun. We actually had a good time visiting that time. And then I went to Paris twice, and it was like the time difference was so bad. It was 6 hours earlier that like I just never wanted to get out of bed. And so she had like planned all these things to do starting early in the mornings. And I would get there and I'd want to like sleep till noon or 1, which was like 6 or 7 my time. And so we ended up fighting most of the time that I was in Paris. So it was like in this perfect city with this like that's supposedly like fun and romantic, but I'm like 25 and just like a foolish man, and I like won't get out of bed. It's like I just wanted to sleep. And so we had a nice long. We fought a little bit in Paris, and then I came back to Boston, and it was like kind of over, but I still had a lot of stuff like in her apartment that she still had in Boston. And so when I got back, or she messaged or sent me probably called or whatever we used to do back in that, this is like 15 years ago, and was like, saying that she was coming back to Boston, but wasn't sure that we should see each other even because it was like. I was like, well, maybe we just need a little bit of closure. And I think that she was sort of hoping that the door was still open, and I was like not paying attention to what I was saying. She was like, closure, great. And then as she was talking, she's like, there's all this loud noises, and it's literally like, she's like, if you want any of your stuff, come get it. It's like out in Beacon Street. And so she was like similar. There were a lot of like movie-esque scenes. She had boxed up all the things that I had left behind, like in her apartment over like the year that I had known her, and she had just thrown them in anger out her door, like sailed into the street. And so like an hour later I drove by, and like there was just like all my things were like littering Beacon Street and Mass Ave on the corner. And I was like, well, I guess that's over. But that was it. That was probably like when you look back at your life and the decisions you might have made, that's like the first time I met someone that I was like, oh, I think I'll probably get married. Like, this is the person that I'll marry. And then we ended up hating each other off and on for a long time. And also almost being like, yeah, it should have been the right thing to do. I bet if I met her 10 years later, it would have been very different, because I would have been like a lot older and more mature and had like a better sense of what life was supposed to be like.
Weird details and notes. What was the school that you were teaching at like?
What was it like?
Well, like what was the name and like what was it like?
Oh, it was Park School. It was across town in Boston. And they had an internship program. And so it was, like for me, I grew up in the country. I'd gone to private schools and stuff, but this was like a step above that. It's like basically a school just like Meadowbrook, just twice as big, closer to the city. But like giant and beautiful, and it was great because my job was just to like work with teachers who'd been teaching forever, like and like coaching, just trying to learn how to be a teacher.
What was her name?
Julia.
Would you be able to like give like a brief description
Of her?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, she was I think, born and raised in Boston, and super smart, and was into teaching, but was also just like, I don't know, like kind of like an intellectual from like kind of a big family. I don't know how else I would describe her. She was like kind of fun and kind of feisty.
Like what type of event was it?
Which event?
The event where like.
Where we met?
Yeah.
It was like an end of the year. I think it was like a birthday party or something. And it was just like, I just remember being somewhere with all my colleagues. Like June, so it wasn't quite like an end of the year school sponsored celebration. It was like, but for one of our close colleagues. So a lot of people were there. I don't remember exactly what it was. Somewhere nearby, like at a restaurant, I think.
Like when you left, like 2 weeks later, like, where were you?
When we left together.
Yeah.
I had moved I was living she lived downtown Boston. I was living with a different family in Chestnut Hill, and I was driving, I'd been living in Bend, Oregon in the summer, which is like in the desert. So I was driving across country anyway. I had a job out there. I was coached baseball and softball for little kids at a camp. And so I knew I was going to the camp, and so when our internship was finished, I had to make the road trip, and so she had to stay for like another week in Boston longer than I wanted to. So I think I ended up staying in town a couple extra days to wait for her, and then she just jumped in the car and we drove the Mass Pike and then Highway 90 and 80 all the way to Oregon.
Do you know which grad school she went to?
Middlebury.
Like when you had like a conversation with her like downstairs, like where was that? Like description of like where it was, I guess.
When what?
The conversation with her like standing from the garage and all that.
Oh, yeah, it was in downtown Boston on Mass Ave. like right by the Mass Ave Bridge that goes over the Charles River. So it was like pretty picturesque. Right above Storrow Drive. I don't know if those mean anything to you, but there's like the river that runs right through Boston and Cambridge. It was like standing on a street corner right on the edge of the river. It's like the most beautiful spot.
What time of day was it?
It was like late afternoon.
Do you know what type of car she had, or like a description of the car?
Yeah, she had a white VW Bug. It was like VW Beetles, like those bugs, those like weird shaped cars. They're like round like this.
Vaguely?
VW Bug, you can look it up. It's like they got reissued. They were like cars from the '60s that got remade, and it was like bright white, and it was like when they first were starting to come back out again. So, it was a very noticeable car. It was like iconic from the '60s, and then she had one too. So it was like everybody in this, like you'd see her drive by. There was only a few of them probably in the whole city, and so it was like everybody identified her with that car.
That's most of the questions I wrote down just now for that, but I'll probably send you some questions later. For the profile, would you be able to describe like a concert that you've gone to with your band?
That we've played?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think. Like, the best one for a lot of reasons was the Hard Rock Cafe in Boston, which is it's like a giant hotel chain. There's Hard Rock hotels and cafes everywhere, and it's like called a cafe, but it's really like a nightclub with like live music and stuff. So that was the first time that I ever played in a place that had like a really nice stage with really nice equipment and like a person whose job it was to like engineer it.
Do you know what the lighting was like?
Yeah, the lighting was actually perfect because it was like lighting that shined at the band and then behind you also, which makes you look really cool. And it was this like rich purple light, like really nice reddish, or like just nice purple light. And so the pictures we have from that, like I use that color for advertising everything in our band now, like because all the band people are like lit up really nicely, like red, blue, and purple, and the colors are just awesome.
How many people do you think were in the audience?
We sold 55 tickets, which for us was a record, and so there were 3 other bands that night, so it was probably 100 people total.
Can you describe some of the other band members?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them work here. So it's like Mr. Christensen, the bass player. Miss Campbell is one of the singers. Miss Williamson is the keyboard player. And then there's some other people from outside. But it's nice because like knowing there's other people in this community that have these talents, like, and it's so much easier to be in a band with people you already know what it's like to work with them and all that stuff.
What do you think your stage persona is like?
In some ways, it's like the best and most authentic version of me. Like, I'm very gracious to the people for coming and like spending the money and doing all the stuff they have to do to like get in the room to like hear me sing. Like, I don't take that for granted. I'm happier than I am in any other moment of life when I'm singing and playing live music. So it's like you get to see like pure, honest joy and excitement and like jumping around and dancing, and it's like I wrote all the songs too, so I'm like telling stories that I care about deeply, and I'm like, you know, it's like there's a physicality to singing, so it's like hopefully my stage persona is like gracious and exciting, and then also like soulful in the way that it's like I'm like yelling my diary and my deepest thoughts to everybody in a big room.
Do you know like some of the songs that you performed that night?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I know all of them. I keep every set list like from every show, and so I know like I think almost all of them were originals that I wrote. There may have been 1 or 2 other that wasn't. But sometimes you just play so that people in the audience like are familiar with the song. They can like sing along. They know it. They'll like your band better if you do that. And then I know like so I know every song. Like we still play them all because that was a short show. It was 45 minutes or something, and so now we play up to 2 hours, and those were like our best songs, and some of them still are.
Would you be able to send me like some lyrics from a few of those songs?
Yep. Yeah, I actually have like a on our band's website we changing our name, so but it's like I have like the lyrics and also the full stories behind them, but I can just send you the poetry easily. I have all that written.
How do you think you're normally perceived by others?
I think like disheveled is probably one thing. I think just like I don't. Are you talking about just normally in my life?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's sort of like. I think people think of me as like a little bit nicer than I actually am, because my outward persona is like incredibly friendly, but I'm like kind of an angry perfectionist in my own mind. So I think like my physical appearance, my clothes is like usually fairly unkempt, just because I only have so much time and energy and money to put into something, and it's like to me that feels fairly superficial and irrelevant to the things I'm trying to accomplish, at least like most of the time, most of the days. So, but I also think that like people underestimate you, and it's like you're wearing like a weird shirt and don't have a haircut, and it's like that's a good place to be, where people like underestimate you, because then you can sort of observe and pick your moments, and if people don't think you're paying attention, or they don't think you're as wise or smart as you, you see different sides of people too. So I think there's a lot to being slightly like weird and disheveled, but I think that hopefully people see that, and then I think a lot of people would think of me as a very kind person, hopefully.
What are some interesting things you noticed, like just throughout, just like observing people in general?
I see people who apparently have a deep lack of awareness for their behavior. It's like people don't understand what they're doing or why they do it, and it's like people are just living without like any introspection, or like to me, which is like every second of every day is either introspective or like studying someone and analyzing and understanding behavior. It's like people just seem to like live their lives. It actually seems pleasant, like blissfully ignorant of a lot of these things. So I see that. I see a lack of self-confidence, or like a need for validation. I see that in so many people, and the like intense struggles to like hide it and overcome it at the same time. Like people are just like super needy, and the things they do to fill those voids are like bizarre.
This is going back into like the memory you told me about last time. Mm-hmm. So like, what was your friend's name, like from middle school?
Jeremy. Yeah.
Do you have any other like really significant memories like with him or of him?
I mean, I have lots, because we spent all our time together from like 3rd grade until 8th grade. So it's like 7 years of memories. One summer we went to tennis camp together, like just a day camp. So I remember just always going to play tennis, and then going across the street and getting tons of candy and Slurpees, because his mom let us buy sugar. My mom would never let us get that stuff. So it's like we bonded over that a lot. I remember like so many great moments. Like one day we were walking down a road in our hometown, like the one main road that was paved, and we'd picked a bunch of crab apples, and we were like trying to roll them under cars when the cars would drive by, and then when the cars would get mad, like stop, we'd just jump over the stone wall and run into the woods on the side of the road. And like Jeremy he was tough, so like I would be so scared that they were gonna get out and like chase us and kill us, but like sometimes he would stay there and let the people in the car yell at him. It'd just be like, we had the most evil teacher ever in 4th grade named Mrs. Wood, and he punched her in the stomach at recess one time, and like everybody cheered. That was awesome. This might actually, that first story was kind of long-winded, but this might be a much more fun story to write. If you're thinking about these things. When like we used to camp out on the weekends all the time, and we'd hike like 2 miles into the woods, and then when he was, I think when we were in 8th grade, he had a girlfriend who lived like 5 miles away from where we were camping, and in the middle of the night at like 10, like he'd arranged like have her sneak out of her house to like meet up, and like literally he walked in the middle of the night by himself like 2 miles out of the woods, like rode his bike 2 miles, saw his girlfriend, then turned around and came back, rode back, and then walked 2 miles back in the pitch dark, like no flashlight, anything. Then like showed back up at our campfire, and we were like, oh my god, I would have been so terrified. The last time we really hung out was when I was in high school, and there was like this really kind of annoying nerdy kid who ran like the outdoorsy club at my high school, and I found out that he was taking like 25 people from their like outdoors club camping in a small town, like in my town, because it's like there's full of good camping sites. So we figured out where they were camping, and then we snuck over there in the middle of the night, and we brought like we brought all our fireworks and like little firecrackers and stuff, and we knew they were going for a night hike. That was one of the activities they were going to do, and so we like snuck into the woods and like watched their camp, and then they like lit all these candles where their campsite was, and then like went off into the dark by themselves. And so we took all the candles and moved them like 200 yards. Then we took apart every one of their tents, like folded them up, packed them back in the bags, and then we had figured out, I was like 17, we figured out that you could take like a long stick of firecrackers and take some like stolen cigarettes and like rip the filter off, and then put the cigarette on the wick and then light it, and then it would like slowly burn down. And so we put those like all over the woods, these like, which I had like these 7-minute timers. And so as we were trying to get back, like all of a sudden like this whole crowd of like 25 people and a bunch of teachers were like coming through the woods, and they were totally lost because we'd like hidden all of their like lights and everything, and their campsite was gone. And we were like laying down as low as we could, like watching them walk right by us in the middle of the night. And one of them stepped on Jeremy, and he'd stolen like this big like vat of cream cheese from their cooler. And so we were just trying to play it cool, and like he like stood up after he got stepped on and just whipped the cream cheese at one of the kids and took off running through the woods. And they all chased him, which let the other 3 of us like run and get away. And so we're like running, and then he's running one way, and then all of a sudden the firecrackers just start blowing up all over the woods. And so then I rode my bike home, which was like 5 miles in the middle of the night, which is a normal thing for us to do. And then like my face was totally painted black. I was in all camo. It was like midnight. I'm sitting on the porch, like I have no idea if Jeremy's like alive or dead or what happened to him. And my dad like walks out on the porch and like takes one look at me, and he's just like, oh, like why are you dressed like you just robbed someone? And then sure enough, like an hour later, Jeremy comes like riding down my road in the middle of the night, like on a bike with like no lights, no phone, nothing like that back in the day. That was like and then after that, I was 17, after I was 16 maybe, then I went away to high school in Vermont, so I didn't see him much after that. And then there are like little ones, like we used to always like try to find 2 girls that would be our girlfriends. So like we could still be best friends and hang out all day every day, and then like we'd have like these girlfriends who were also friends, so we wouldn't have to like split up and spend time with other people. We started doing that in like 3rd grade. Like when we wanted to like learn how to kiss someone, we like watched a bunch of movies, and then we'd like go and get pillows from his brother's room and then like pretend to kiss him to try and figure it out, and like put him back in his brother's room, which is pretty gross.
What's your last memory of him?
So I saw him twice after the camp out story. I saw him so like he had started like drinking and doing drugs right about 17 years old. And so there was like one of our other friends from elementary school lived in town, and his mom like didn't care what they did, so they had like everyone kind of knew that there was like this like family's house where you could go in the basement, and like their parents would buy them beer, and they would like drink and smoke marijuana, smoke cigarettes, like hang out all night in the in that garage or in like a basement, just like being weird, like 5 or 6 kids from my town. And so I was driving past the guy's house one time and they were all out in the front yard, like, and they'd gotten into like trying to be really rebellious. And one way they did it was like they wore dresses to school, like long before anyone was talking about gender or anything. They just did it to like freak out like stodgy old teachers. So they were all like outside in the front yard, like drunk in the middle of the day, like spinning around in these dresses. And so I stopped and chatted with him for a while, and he was so weird. It's like I couldn't believe how weird he'd gotten in a year. And then I didn't see him for probably 10 years after that. He moved to San Francisco, and he was like being like a first responder at like giant protests around the world, I think. So he was like following different like major protests in different countries, and like when the like cops would like tear gas people, like he would be there to like help like give them first aid, things like that. And he was way into computers. But his brother, who was a couple years younger than me, I was kind of friends with him for a while too. His brother got married out west, but had like a wedding-ish party back in our hometown, and so we must have both been about 25 then. And so I saw him for a while, and it was still the same person, but it was like the years of drug abuse had changed him, and like just different life paths had changed him. So he wasn't like, we were okay together, but it wasn't like we wouldn't have been friends then. It was just more about the history, and I think he died like 4 years after that.
Where were you when you heard about him dying?
I was in 2007. I was on a 3-week trip in Southeast Asia, and I got home from that trip, and my parents had waited to tell me. It happened like when I was in the middle of that trip, and they had just decided not to tell me until I got home. And so, oh yeah, so I don't remember exactly when I heard, but I was in my hometown. I was with my mom. She's the one who told me. I think it might have been a phone call. I don't remember where it was. I just remember hearing about it, and then I didn't react very strongly. I just don't react when people die. It's really like I feel like it's almost weird how little I react, but I think I just like draw out my reaction over like 20 years of like processing, and it's like kind of awkward. So like my dad cried for days, and I was just like, huh. And it was weird because like his parents never really said anything about it. They didn't tell everybody that it happened. It was like, they don't know exactly when he died. Like someone went and found him, and he was like, he had been drinking lots of cough syrup, I think, which is like an intense drug that like they kind of cover up now, or they like do different things. But and he was a real tech. He was always so into computers. He was like the first person to ever get a computer that I knew, and he was like sitting in like a room in a chair with like multiple screens all the way around him, and like drinking like cases of cough syrup, which is like a hallucinogen and everything, and eating fast food, and just like living in some virtual, like not Minecraft, but some world like that, like some Second Life or some online thing. So he might have lost touch with reality a little bit. I don't know. But I think his brother finally they just couldn't get hold of him. No one heard from him for like weeks. I think his brother had to go down and like from Oregon to San Francisco where he was living and check on him, and I think found him, and he died.
Mom says that I really have to go now.
Okay. Like when I think about the stories,